All right. Welcome everybody and thanks for being here. This is the Hermosa Beach Community Forum on Homelessness. I am Mayor Justin Massey. We scheduled this forum because we heard concerns from our community about our homeless population. And so we just wanted to connect those of you who are interested with the best information we have available about what the city is doing and the resources that are being brought to bear on the challenge of homelessness, not only in the city of Hermosa Beach, but in the LA County region generally. In Hermosa Beach in 2018, the City Council adopted a homelessness plan. It is a 5-year plan that was the product of multiple community meetings and stakeholder input from multiple stakeholders. The plan is available on the city website. I encourage those of you who are interested to read it, to see what some of the challenges are that we have with respect to the issue of homelessness and what our 5-year plan is with respect to that challenge. It gives you information about our existing efforts, our established partnerships, our long-term goals for ensuring not only the safety of our community, but the safety of homeless people who either in Hermosa Beach for extended periods of time or who pass through our community at any given point in time. We also, during the pandemic, as a city, acted to prevent people from losing their homes by enacting eviction moratoria. That prevented folks from getting turned out of their houses because they had lost their job and had no income to pay rent. That was something that the state did, the county did as well. We have now at this point aligned our eviction moratoria with the state's similar moratoria. There were a lot of factors that went into those decisions, not the least of which were the fact that we knew homelessness was a problem regionally and statewide, and we knew that the COVID-19 pandemic presented a particular threat, not only to our homeless population, but to the community at large, if we were to add to that population by having folks evicted from their homes. The city of Hermosa Beach does a great deal of additional things beyond simply the day-to-day efforts we have in place to manage the homelessness challenge in the city of Hermosa Beach and the preparation and implementation of our homelessness plan, as well as our efforts during the pandemic. We participate annually in LA County's homeless count to make sure we have an understanding of trends of our homeless population and their particular situation in our city on an annual basis. And it is part of what we do, generally speaking, in terms of city operations, simply because it is one of our primary challenges and it touches multiple departments in our city as well as in the county. Everyone deserves a safe and sanitary place to live. That's the starting point for the way we approach the problem. As you know, this is a complex issue involving people who themselves have often complex issues. Our panel members will discuss those issues tonight and some of the challenges that they present and what we can and cannot do to address the challenge of homelessness in our community. This meeting is being conducted virtually to enable the largest group possible to participate and to participate safely. We are recording this meeting. The recorded version will be available on the city's YouTube channel when this is concluded, and we have uploaded the video of tonight's meeting. We've had nearly 100 people register to participate. We invited folks to submit questions in advance. We have recorded those questions and we will get to those questions first once we get to the Q&A portion of tonight, which we are intending to do as quickly as we can. To ensure everyone who wishes to ask a question tonight has an opportunity to do so, we're going to use the chat function on Zoom. Most of you are probably familiar with it at this point, but if you're not, if you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button. If you just click on that, a window will open up where you can type in your question. Once we get to the Q&A section, we'll work through the questions that were submitted in advance, and then we will begin to address the questions that are presented via chat. And we will do that until we've exhausted all the questions or until we've reached 8 o'clock, whichever comes first. We will get to as many questions as we can and provide you as many answers as we can in the 2 hours we have together this evening. Without further ado, let me introduce all of our panelists first, and then I will ask each of them to make some opening remarks, and then we will move to Q&A. Our first panelist is our city manager, Suja Lowenthal. Our second panelist is our chief of police, Paula Barron. Our third panelist is Supervisor Hans Field Deputy, Ivan Sulik. Our fourth panelist is the regional coordinator for Harbor Interfaith Services, Brianna Jairam. Our fifth panelist is the Director of Government Affairs for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, Jose Delgado. Our sixth panelist is the Deputy Director of Countywide Engagement for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, Latina Jackson. And our final panel member is our Deputy City Prosecutor, Anna Papadakis. So let me start with our city manager, Suja Lowenthal. Suja, could you please help the folks attending understand the city's role, how we work in partnership with other agencies and community organizations, and some of what we have done as a city to address the challenge of homelessness in our city?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome to our panelists, and thank you to our panelists as well as our attendees. As the mayor said, one person without a home is one too many. Our goal is to connect people experiencing homelessness with the resources that they need. We know that we cannot do it alone with the small team that we have, and so we do count on our partners for housing services, of course, but also mental health and other social services needed to help them make the transition from the street to a home. The landmark homelessness plan the city adopted in 2018 came after extensive public input. It placed a priority on strengthening our response to homelessness while ensuring community safety. It developed a regional effort so that people experiencing homelessness in Hermosa Beach have access to local and tailored services through an outreach and dispatch hotline, in-person engagement with service professionals, housing and shelter assistance, employment assistance, and mental health services. In our continued implementation of that plan, we have a training next week for several members of city staff that have the most interaction with the public so that they can answer questions and help address homelessness issues. Our police officers are our city staff members who interact the most with people experiencing homelessness, and they have received training to do this. They also work closely with Harbor Interfaith Services to help secure housing, mental health, and other services for our unhoused neighbors. The mayor mentioned the council's adoption of an eviction moratorium during the pandemic to help prevent homelessness. We've also trained staff on the eviction moratorium and are working to educate the public about the state program that will help pay back rent and utility bills. We have an existing agreement with Redondo Beach to combine resources to address quality of life issues. This is a partnership where officers go out and contact people experiencing homelessness and see if they can get them to accept help. But as you'll hear from the panel tonight, this process often takes time and has many complexities involved. It also often takes many times where we are in contact with individuals before services are accepted. This requires getting the trust of people living on the streets to helping them secure a necessary ID to be able to obtain healthcare and housing. There's quite a bit involved from the first point of contact to securing services for individuals that need it the most. I also wanted to mention that we're exploring other options. We understand that the current model of homelessness services and approach to providing support for homelessness relies quite heavily on public safety. And we'd like to step back from that a little bit because not all individuals need a public safety response. So we're exploring options such as the CAHOOTS model in Eugene, Oregon, which includes a mental health pilot project. And CAHOOTS stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets. It's an innovative community-based public safety system to provide a mental health first response for crises involving mental illness, homelessness, and addiction. The program mobilizes two-person teams consisting of a medic, which can be a nurse, a paramedic, or an EMT, and a crisis worker who has substantial training and experience in the mental health field. We benefit greatly from the support of all the partners we have here tonight and are most appreciative of the help they provide as we all seek to find a way to help people who do not have a place to call home. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Suja. Our next panelist is our police chief, Paul LeBaron. Chief, could you share with us what the police department's role is and some of the successes you've seen as a result of those efforts?
Thank you, Mayor Massey, and I'd be happy to share a little bit. So the Hermosa Beach Police Department is very involved in the efforts to address homelessness and the quality of life issues, as well as criminal activity connected to it. As mentioned by our city manager, we are the first responders in many cases, and our officers are very proactive in making contact with people who reside in our city, but may not have permanent shelter. The police department is part of a team that's here tonight that you're meeting with the panelists. And this team provides wraparound services to the people who are in need of assistance. We at the police department are very aware that our community counts on us to not only address these issues, but maintain the high quality of life for the residents and visitors who are in the city. And our officers know that they need to do everything in their ability to address the crime and the actions that impact that quality of life. So when officers are interacting with the homeless community, it's important to know this, that they're always going to abide by the laws that are in place, and they're going to work within the legal means available to them to handle a situation. But when it's appropriate, they will and they do take enforcement action against any violations of the law. We take the enforcement action when we take enforcement action, we work very closely with our city prosecutor's office to ensure that the results are effective. This includes a lot of creative solutions to make Hermosa Beach safer in a time when a lot of the traditional law enforcement strategies are being challenged and laws are being passed to change the way we've done business for a long time. Strategies such as stay-away orders are being used now to provide our officers with the ability to enforce laws that otherwise would not be enforceable. It's also important to note that most citations and arrests that are related to quality of life crimes, which is generally what we're dealing with the homeless community, they're misdemeanors. And so contrary to a lot of public comment and opinion, we don't depend on the district attorney's office to file those cases. We are very fortunate to have a city prosecutor's office connected to our detective bureau, and we're able to bring those cases directly to our city prosecutor's office for consideration, which allows us to be aggressive and bring those creative solutions to pass. Although there's a lot of challenges that we can talk about and that the officers face, I do want to start by talking about some of the successes that we're seeing. And so I'd like to introduce real quickly Patrol Operations Lieutenant Landon Phillips, who's briefly going to share an example of how we were able to use a creative team-based approach to solve a public safety threat in our downtown area. Landon.
Thank you, Chief. As the Chief said, my name is Landon Phillips. I'm the Patrol Division Lieutenant for Hermosa Beach Police Department. And the example was about a year ago, and we had a homeless individual in the city. And this individual was known to residents and anyone who frequents the area and our officers to be somewhat aggressive, but not violent. He was verbally aggressive, and he was certainly somebody who would act out and draw attention and raise concern and generated a lot of calls for our officers. But for much of the time, he was nonviolent, and he was not necessarily committing criminal violations, but when he would receive citations. On several occasions, he was taken on, I think most people are familiar with a 5150 hold. 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code is an involuntary committal of a subject for a psychiatric evaluation. And that can last up to 72 hours, although it frequently does not. They don't hold them up to 72 hours or the entire 72 hours every time. So that had happened a number of times, and the concerns continued to happen, and there were some minor arrests. So we partnered with, and they're here tonight, the Department of Mental Health, our partnerships that we have there with Harbor Interfaith, and we started to strategize on how we can work together with all of these agencies to help this individual get the mental health services he needed so that he wasn't a concern or a threat to our community. This was all going on, and unfortunately, he did assault a resident, and that resulted in his arrest, and he was incarcerated. And that was, again, as the Chief said, a misdemeanor. And he was released because it was a misdemeanor, and he can't be held for more than a short period. He was released, and the behavior continued. It did continue for some time, and there was another similar event. and he was rearrested. But this one was different because through that partnership with the Department of Mental Health and Harbor Interfaith, we were able to advocate to the court on all of the previous efforts that we had made. The Department of Mental Health has what's called the AOT, I believe that's Advanced Outreach Team, and they had been in contact with this individual and been trying vigorously to get him into some type of mental health services or drug and alcohol treatment program. And initially he was resistant and didn't want to accept those services. But after this last incident, it did trigger, again, his arrest. And as he went to court, those groups were there with our detectives, with our officers to advocate to the court that this subject needs help. And he was determined to be unable to stand trial because of his mental health issues. And he has since remained in custody until he can receive the treatment that he needs so that he's not a danger to our community. So that is an example of someone who was very concerning and was dangerous. Again, not initially, but through the combined efforts, we were able to have a lasting impact to where he's no longer concerning our community. And the last thing I'll add, because I don't want to paint I don't want to paint every homeless individual with the same brush, which is most of our homeless individuals do not have this level of concern of violence. They're homeless individuals and have things that they need help with, but not every homeless individual is dangerous or a threat to the community. But this was a good example of partnering with the multiple agencies and having an impact, basically overcoming all of the challenges that we continue to face today. Thank you, Chief.
Terrific. Thank you, Lieutenant Phillips. Thank you, Chief. Next, I want to turn to Harbor Interfaith's Regional Coordinator, Brianna Jairam. Brianna, could you describe Harbor Interfaith's role in addressing homelessness in our region and some of the successes and challenges in connecting people who are homeless with housing?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am Brianna Jairam. I am the Regional Coordinator for the Adult Coordinated Entry System in Service Planning Area 8 of Los Angeles County, and that includes the entire South Bay. Harbor Interfaith Services is the lead organization for Service Planning Area 8, and we do conduct extensive outreach through a specific contract with the 3 beach cities of Hermosa, Redondo Beach, and Manhattan Beach. And so our outreach team outreaches to each of those cities in partnership with the agencies already described, strong partnerships with all. And, you know, we've had a lot of success, I think, just in terms of some of the resources that have come online in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, we in Los Angeles County had an initiative called Project Room Key, and we were able to, through our beach cities team of outreach workers, shelter anybody who was high risk for COVID-19 and experiencing homelessness in the city of Hermosa Beach, as well as the other beach cities and the other South Bay cities. And so anybody who was at high risk, meaning 62 and older, or had some underlying health conditions that put them at high risk, we were able to shelter them throughout the pandemic and connect them with housing resources. So that's something we're really proud of as a team. And then we've also had some great permanent housing outcomes in terms of, there was an individual female sleeping in front of City Hall for quite some time and was able to connect with our team in the beach cities and access that same Project Room Key. And through being able to stabilize, get off the streets, and take care of the physical health issues that she was having, she was then able to work with a case manager in the shelter setting to locate permanent housing, utilizing her housing choice vouchers. So she was able to locate housing within the community with a case manager. And so those are some of just a few of the successes particular to homelessness in Hermosa Beach. And we look forward to the continued partnership and just continuing to serve the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. Next, I'd like to call on Jose Delgado, the Director of Government Affairs for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. Jose, would you share with us some of the resources that your agency brings to bear on the challenge of homelessness in Hermosa Beach and our part of LA County?
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with the rest of the panel. My name is Jose Delgado. I'm here representing the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. We are the lead agency coordinating the entire continuum of care here in Los Angeles. As most of you may know, homelessness is not just a one city specific issue. It's a regional problem. And the LA Homeless Services Authority, or LAHSA, is in charge of helping coordinate the regional response to what the city of Hermosa Beach and the rest of the South Bay cities are experiencing. We work closely with agencies like Harbor Interfaith, and work very closely with our partners at the county, including Supervisor Han's office, and our partners at the health agencies, including the Department of Mental Health. Our job is to ensure that we provide sheltering resources, permanent supportive housing resources, and other preventative measures to help people who are on the cusp of entering homelessness and hopefully getting them to avoid entering the system. So our job is to really coordinate that regional approach to hopefully addresses some of the concerns that we see on our streets every day. We're very fortunate to have strong partners with the LA Sheriff's Department, who I'm sure partners with the local police department, and to work to address folks who are experiencing some of the mental health issues and other non-mental health related issues, to hopefully avoid getting them into incarceration or things of that nature, getting them the help that they need. So we play more of a regional coordinator role in this, along with providing a lot of the permanent supportive housing across the county, along with some of the shelters that help people get some sort of shelter during inclement weather times and year round. So those are sort of the general approaches that LAHSA takes and trying to address homelessness here in Los Angeles.
Terrific, Jose, thank you. Next, let me turn to the Deputy Director of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, Latina Jackson. Latina, could you describe your agency's role in addressing homelessness and some of the challenges and successes that the department has?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here tonight, Mr. Mayor. So the Department of Mental Health participates in sort of the strategy around addressing homelessness in a broad sort of way. For the city of Hermosa, we provide, as Chief LeBaron just spoke about the law enforcement response with both a mental health clinician and a sworn officer, and those kinds of response teams for crisis response, in addition to our psychiatric mobile response teams that provide support in the beach city areas. As it relates to my specific role, I oversee our engagement services for the department, and is really about bringing those individuals into care that are out on the fringes, and specifically for this form, people experiencing homelessness. My division participates in collaboration with, Jose, the efforts of LAHSA, and Brianna with Harbor Interfaith as part of the specialty wing of homeless outreach, and that we provide specialty mental health care on the streets, specifically our homeless outreach and mobile engagement team, also known as HOME, provide specialized mental health care for those individuals that are so severely impaired that they need actual, psychiatry care or intensive intervention on the streets. Generally speaking, individuals that are so impaired that they themselves don't know they have an illness, and they need a little bit more support to move from street to home. I also oversee the assisted outpatient treatment program that was referenced earlier that helped that gentleman get connected to services after he was incarcerated. So we're in a larger, broader, specialized portion of this strategy. And in terms of successes, what I'll say is just recently our homeless outreach and mobile engagement program implemented a pilot to initiate conservatorship, which is basically a court-ordered guardianship for people with severe mental illness that aren't able to care for their basic needs of food, clothing, or shelter. And it was a small pilot over the course of 1 year, but we were fortunate enough to have 35 individuals presented to the pilot. So far, we've had 21 court-appointed conservators for guardianship for those individuals. All of them are housed in appropriate housing and receiving treatment. And so for us, it's quite a success and a level of service that we plan to continue going forward.
Thank you, Latina. And we are down to our last two panelists with opening remarks. Let me next turn to Supervisor Hans Field Deputy Ivan Sulik. Ivan, can you share some information about what the county is doing to support city's efforts to address homelessness? And can you also share information about county funding for addressing the issue here in the South Bay?
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Again, Ivan Sulik with Supervisor Han's office. I handle all the homeless and housing policy and projects within the 4th District, Marina Del Rey down to the beach cities, the South Bay, all the way up the Gateway. And so I just want to talk about some of the work that the county is doing. In particular, next week, the Board of Supervisors will be taking up and voting on Measure H, which is the quarter-cent sales tax to combat homelessness. On Tuesday, they're going to be voting on a budget of $516 million that goes to fund the work that our good partners at LASA, DMH, and our providers such as Harbor Interfaith are doing on the ground. Primarily, we are funding prevention services, outreach services, and permanent supportive housing, which is needed and is essential to getting people the help that they need, is getting them into housing. In particular, in the South Bay, many of you know that the South Bay has its own council of governments. Basically, it's where a group where all the cities come together, set policies, set goals in the region. The county is looking to increase an allotment of Measure H funding to the South Bay COG in order to fund projects in the South Bay. An example is the Redondo Beach Homeless Court, the navigation services that's going on in the beach cities in the South Bay. And so we're looking to increase those funding. In addition, seeing how we can fund the implementation of homeless plans that many cities, such as the cities of Hermosa Beach, have instituted. And so that's what the county is looking to do. Soon we will be receiving American Rescue Plan money. The governor has just passed the budget, which has money in there for homelessness that the county is coming to the county. So as things develop, we will be working with the COGs, which are our Council of Governments. We will be working with individual cities and how we can collaborate on homeless projects to get, our most needy off the street.
Terrific, Ivan. Thank you very much. And our last panelist with opening remarks tonight is Anna Papadakis, our Deputy Prosecutor for the City of Hermosa Beach. Anna, can you share with us a little bit about the role of the City Prosecutor's Office, legal challenges to addressing homelessness? We often get questions about why can't we just incarcerate folks who are homeless or camping on the streets? So if you could address that and also talk a little bit about how we handle folks living in their vehicles as potentially distinct from folks who are living on the street without a vehicle.
Yeah, sure. I can try to address some of those. So I'm one of your deputy city prosecutors. The City of Hermosa contracts with the City of Redondo Beach, our city attorney's office. We provide prosecution for any and all misdemeanor crimes occurring within Hermosa Beach. And as far I know, the big question in this group, and a lot of the recurring questions I'm seeing is why can't we just arrest people who we see that are homeless, who are hanging outside of the bathroom? Why can't we just arrest them? And I would want to direct you to the leading case that which is the Martin v. Boise case. It's quite famous. It's the one that we all come back to when we're in this arena of homelessness. The Martin v. Boise case has established very firmly and very clearly that it is cruel and unusual punishment, is against our Constitution to arrest somebody for the condition that they're in. And their condition meaning that they're sleeping, living, lying in the street. and that they're homeless. So it would be cruel and unusual punishment to arrest somebody for being homeless unless there's an alternative place for them to go. Meaning that unless there's a shelter to offer an individual, you cannot arrest them simply for being simply for sleeping in the street or being in the street, or any violation of a loitering statute, any of the typical camping in public municipal code violations, unless you offer an individual a bed within the city, within the jurisdiction, and that has yet to be clearly defined. Unless you offer that individual a bed, you cannot cite them, you cannot arrest them for any type of violation. Now, it's different if someone is committing a crime, like, for example, drunk in public or urinating in public, things like that. Those are different types of contacts that we can use enforcement action on. But simply being in a public space with their belongings, that is currently the very subject of the Martin v. Boise case, and why we cannot arrest for camping violations.
All right, thank you, Anna. And now we can get to Q&A, and I'm sure some of these issues will be explored in more detail. As I said at the top of the panel, we had questions submitted in advance, and so we'll work through some of those. And then for those of you who are participating and want to ask questions during the course of this forum, go ahead and click on the chat button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and type in your question, and we'll turn to those as soon as we work through the questions submitted in advance. I have a first question that I think is probably for the chief, could be for Brianna as well, but it's a general question. I know from our homeless counts that our homeless population is roughly 25, if I recall correctly. A good balance between folks living in their vehicles versus folks not with a vehicle. Are we able to regularly contact the homeless individuals that tend to reside in the city of Hermosa Beach as opposed to just pass through? And could you let me know, how regularly are we in contact with them to build relationships, to make sure that they know services are available, to make sure that they're not a threat to themselves or the community, and so on? So either the chief or Brianna, if you want to weigh in on that question.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll start. The answer to your question is very simply yes. The police officers are consistently keeping track of everybody. We have people, I know it's being brought up here in certain areas in the city that are very regular, and we know who they are, and we're very familiar with them. So, and the thing that's important to recognize is officers share this information with each other. So every officer, when they go from one shift to another, they have a briefing and they talk about what they did the shift before, and they're making sure that everybody knows. Although we have 28 that have been confirmed to be residing in Hermosa Beach, there's a lot more that come through, pass through. So one of the things that's helpful, and I think we'll probably talk about it later, but I'm just going to throw it out now, is the community needs to let us know, the police department, and the best way to do that is through 911. If you call and let us know that there's somebody that's doing something that's impacting quality of life, or some kind of suspicious or criminal activity, it gives us the ability to go out and contact them. And if there's something we can do to enforce the law, we'll do it. And if there's not, then we take that information. And like I said, we are part of a team of wraparound services. We'll share that information with whoever is most equipped to handle it. So if it's not an issue of breaking the law where we can take enforcement action, we'll share it with Harbor Interfaith or with Department of Mental Health or whoever's going to be able to help them. And then we'll continue to check on that. But one of the things that really frustrates the police department is when the majority of the conversation about what's going on is happening on social media. That's great if you want to talk to your neighbors, but it doesn't help us at all. So at least do us the favor of calling the police department and letting us know about it. And then if you have any questions, follow up with us, because we do monitor social media, but that is not the primary way that information should be passed along.
Terrific. Thanks, Chief. And Brianna, for folks who have a non-emergency call regarding a homeless individual in the city of Hermosa Beach, they can call Harbor Interfaith directly at the number that's listed on the city's website, which is, I believe, 424-276-3602, extension 294. Is that the correct number for a non-emergency call related to a homeless individual in Hermosa Beach?
Yes, so that is actually, yes, that is our phone number to directly actually to me. So I would take that request. I also can receive email. But the one thing that we will, I know that there'll be more information on this at the end of the presentation, but we also are, since we are the lead agency, we take all of the homeless outreach portal requests. And so there is a website, www.la-hop.org. And those requests get sent directly to our Spot 8 outreach coordinator, whose office right next to me. And then those get they get tagged to me, and then I send them to our outreach team members, and they immediately go out. Thankfully, our team has office space in the beach cities. Harbor Interfaith is based in San Pedro, but our beach cities team is there and available to go out as soon as those requests come in. So definitely let me know or utilize the outreach portal.
Okay, terrific, Brianna and Jose. Thank you for posting in the chat, which I hope everybody who's participating can see the link to the LAHOP website where folks can submit reports that way as well. And again, I encourage folks to go on the city's website, which is hermosabeach.gov, and just type homelessness in. You'll find your way to the Homeless Services webpage, which provides not only our homelessness plan, but a listing of all the services and contact information for reporting both emergency and non-emergency issues with respect to homeless individuals in the city of Hermosa Beach. Let me circle back to a question that has arisen on a couple of occasions and was the subject of a couple of the questions we had in advance of tonight's forum, and that is, there is a homeless person who apparently has continued to live at some time at the 2nd Street Beach Restroom in Hermosa Beach. Why do we allow that to happen? What are the limitations on our ability to manage that situation? What are we doing about it? What can we tell the community with respect to that? Not only as a study in itself, but also as an example of some of the efforts we're making, as well as some of the challenges we have with respect to managing the challenge of homelessness. And that question would be either for Brianna or I think Chief LeBaron, most likely.
So I can start and just speak a little bit about our non-emergency response to that location. We are actively outreaching that location on a daily basis. I know, just so that everybody here knows, all of our services are voluntary. So folks have to agree to enter into services with us. And so sometimes, as has been talked about, that can be very complex for folks to engage in services. And so we go out multiple times, even if we're told no the first time, we will continue to go out and engage. And what we've found is that the more we engage, our outreach team engages with individuals, the more we build rapport. I always say we are strangers when we walk up to folks for the first time. And so it does take time to build relationship with folks and offer them available resources. And when we have available resources, they are offered. Whether that's emergency shelter and other things. And so those things are offered, and every time we receive a request, our team goes out, and we do work in collaboration with Hermosa Beach Police Department on that location, along with any other quote unquote hotspot locations that we're notified about.
Okay, terrific. Chief LeBaron, anything to add to that response?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to let Lieutenant Phillips talk a little bit about that. He's got some information on some recent activity.
Thank you, Chief. So I'll back up maybe about 6 months, and it's, I've seen all of the questions come in leading up to tonight's forum. And months ago, it wasn't just one individual, it was 2 or 3 individuals. And we had multiple contacts with those individuals. And when they are committing a crime, and not just by virtue of being there, we do enforce that. And they are taken either to the station and they're booked, and then they are given a citation, and then they're released. And that's our limitations under the current law. Sometimes they'll be held in custody until they go to court, and then they're released from court, and then they're scheduled for a court date down the road. And we continue to work on that. And if someone is a repeat offender, then their time that they could be held in custody may extend. Some of the more recent ones, we've seen that, there is a particular individual and has some property there and, a couple of umbrellas. And as Deputy City Prosecutor Papadakis mentioned, this person, every time that our officers make contact or go by the area, they are not committing a crime. They are there, and by virtue of just being there, we cannot take any enforcement action on that behavior. If they are doing something such as drinking in public or urinating in public, we will enforce that. But it's something that has to be observed by the officer. If it happened 3 hours ago and our officers respond and make a contact with an individual, there's no violation if it's not being observed by the officer. The more recent information or activity that the chief mentioned is just this last Saturday, there was a homeless individual at 2nd Street, and he got into a verbal altercation with a resident or a visitor of the beach, and that subject brandished a knife. And fortunately, the resident there did call us, and we went there and we made an arrest. And that subject was held in custody for the maximum amount of time. So we are doing everything we can. And when there is a criminal act, we will respond, we will make arrests, we will issue citations, and we will enforce to the extent that the law allows. So that is our ongoing efforts. But again, just the question about the individual being allowed to be there, just virtue of being there is not a crime in itself. We do enforce the ordinance for the beach closure. The Hermosa Beach Municipal Code closes the beach from midnight to 6 a.m. every day. So anyone on the beach, camping or otherwise, is enforced. And that's something that we continue to do. But just being there during the day and the non-closure hours is not a crime.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just follow up real quick on what Lieutenant Phillips said. He mentioned that 6 months ago, there were more than one or two, there were multiple. I mentioned in my opening comments some of the strategic and creative ways that we're addressing this. And one of those is a stay away order. One of the people that was consistently causing problems down there, we were able to work with the city prosecutor's office and actually get a stay away order. And what that did is every single time he showed up at that location, we arrested him on the spot. Now, part of what I think the community needs to understand is, I also mentioned that some of the traditional law enforcement methods that we use are being challenged or taken away. When we say we enforce the law, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because for many of our officers this is frustrating, that doesn't always mean taking someone to jail. It oftentimes means issuing a citation. It might mean taking a crime report, or if we do take them to jail, the likelihood is, depending on the crime, that we cannot hold them. And that is not because we don't want to. That is because the law does not allow us to, whether through COVID measures or the current laws that are in place. But we continue to be creative. We continue to use the strategies available, like going to the court and saying this person really needs to stay in custody and doing what we can. So it is frustrating, and I hear what the community is saying. I just want to make sure that they understand that the limitations are there. That doesn't stop us from continuing to do everything we possibly can. And the results are actually happening. We just don't see it because there are still people out there that are visible, but we are aware of them and we'll continue to do what we can.
Thank you, Chief. Anna, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I just want to piggyback on what Lieutenant and the Chief are saying with respect to enforcement action. If the community at large sees something going on and these quality of life issues, those are things that you can report, and you would be the witness to the crime. You would be the one to tell the officer, I saw this person urinating in front of the restroom, or I saw this person drinking out of an open container, and it requires follow through. This is a unique, very unique issue. We're in unprecedented times. I know that phrase has been overused lately. However, with what we can do, we will try to do in the face of no bail, in the face of just having to book and cite and release people with citations. But we are prepared to take the enforcement action that is needed. And I also wanted to comment on something Brianna said. Outreach is constant and consistent. So when outreach workers are out there, it does take time over and over again, repeated contacts. And then when someone's ready, they're ready. And that might happen in conjunction with a prosecution. That might happen when somebody has 8 or 9 drunken public cases stacked up against them. And then they see, okay, you know what? This isn't working for me anymore. It is this very symbiotic relationship between prosecution, police department, DMH, our outreach workers like Harbor Interfaith. It is a true collaboration in order to effectuate change, and it is a long process. Just from personal experience, in Redondo, we have a homeless court, which I help facilitate, and we've been operating it for about, I think officially a little over a year and a half. And we've been able to house about 15 people. And that is over in a long period of time. It does take quite some time. So it's just something else to think about. Is somebody may not be ready on the first contact with one of Brianna's team, maybe not the second, but maybe the third or fourth, maybe the fifth, we'll see. So that was my contribution to Lieutenant and Chief's thoughts.
Terrific. Thank you, Anna. Brianna and Jose, a quick question for you. What does the process of securing housing and resources for homeless individuals look like?
Maybe I'll start, Brianna. So the, housing comes in many forms, but I just want to make one clear point at the beginning that shelter is not housing. Shelter is a temporary solution to a long-term problem. And so while we always want to have folks out of the streets and under some sort of temporary housing through a shelter, the ultimate goal is to place folks in some sort of resource that will give them the supportive services, either financial, substance, mental, whatever the individual requires. Housing should be paramount. And best practices have shown nationwide that if you have someone under a roof stabilized, then the rest of the things are much easier to accomplish. And so some of the work that we are always advocating for is to provide sort of a good balance of temporary shelters with long-term housing. And we're not talking about, we're talking about just long-term affordable housing, not like Section 8 housing, but just affordable housing across the county. I know that that's in California, that becomes very difficult, but as so much as the state is currently working on providing quite a bit of funding for municipalities to acquire and renovate and rehash certain locations to become more affordable housing for individuals, homeless or not, that will be the ultimate goal. So with service providers like Harbor Interfaith and the rest of our cohorts across the county, the job is to have someone off the street into some short shelter situation where we can stabilize, then pair them up with a long-term resource through a number of different programs that Lawson and some of our other service providers provide to folks experiencing homelessness. Brianna, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I'll add a little bit more on like the ground level in terms of the process that is pretty typical, although like I said, each case is, and each person we work with has their own set of needs. And so what is typical is the engagement process. And from there, our team looks to see what basic documents does this individual have or don't they have. And so that starts with the California ID. If that's needed, our team will transport to the DMV and obtain the ID for them. And we also provide a mailing address. So Harbor Interfaith Services can serve as a mailing address for participants if they enter into a mail agreement with us, so that we can remove that barrier for folks. And then the second piece is income. So kind of seeing what income do folks have? Do they have the general relief from LA County? Do they have Social Security benefits? Are they employed? All of those things. And so we take a look at that and we work to verify that to see what they might be able to afford. if at all. And so we start there, and then depending upon the individual's needs, we also will connect them with medical care. Medical insurance is huge. So if someone doesn't have Medi-Cal, that's also another thing that we get them right away is health insurance, because we realize that's a barrier to accessing non-emergency health care. We want to try to ensure that our folks have primary care providers and are not accessing healthcare through the emergency room, which can be challenging for a lot of different reasons. And so those are the basic things that we do initially. And then we have conversations about what does housing, or what is the next step for you? It's not always housing for folks. Sometimes folks are like, yeah, you know what, I would like treatment. That's my next step. And how can we go about doing that? And so collaborating with our recovery partners around how do we get folks into those programs, depending upon what the need is. And then from there are various different housing options in terms of subsidies. I will say, as mentioned by Anna, that these processes can take time, just depending upon where the individual is currently living, where they would like to live, what resource in terms of subsidy is available. And so again, that's really where it gets a little bit more individualized when folks have different levels of need in terms of being stable in housing. And so we operate from the housing first model, as Jose mentioned. We believe that we will get folks off the streets and into housing as quickly as possible. It can be interim. Obviously, we prefer permanent with ongoing case management, and then offer all of those wraparound services such as mental health that has been described, ongoing retention case management, anything else that would really help that individual stabilize in housing. That's what we're looking to do in the long term. And so again, each individualized plan looks different, but our team does a great job of collaborating with all the providers, the diverse providers that we have in the South Bay and LA County as a whole.
All right, thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Jose. Let me turn to our questions that have been submitted in chat. Let's start to work away at those. I think this first question is probably for Brianna and the chief, but anybody can absolutely chime in. The first question shares the perception that Manhattan Beach makes their homeless population go away. Is Manhattan Beach doing anything that we can learn from, that we can do differently, that we can do to better manage our homeless population?
So I'll start with that, and I'll actually expand that a little bit. I know it's been mentioned already in our conversation that this is a regional issue. I think Jose mentioned that this is not just specific to Hermosa Beach. I meet regularly with chiefs in the South Bay and throughout LA County. And when the topic of what is on your plate comes up, it is always homelessness and other crimes that are happening, but homelessness is right there at the top. I will certainly not speak for Manhattan Beach, but I can tell you consistently, all the chiefs of police in our area are struggling with this situation. So we learn from each other. We work very similarly. We ask the questions. We talk to each other, and the strategies that Manhattan Beach is using are the same strategies that we're using, at least from the police department side of things. And we will continue to do that. And I can absolutely tell you that if anybody figures out something that's being done effectively, that's not kept as a secret. That is shared. It is shared openly, and we pattern our work after that that's being done right. And so in any case in law enforcement in LA County in particular, I believe all the best practices are known and being used.
Brianna, anything to add to that? I know that Harbor Interfaith works across the South Bay. Are there any lessons learned from other cities that we could learn from in terms of managing this challenge?
Well, I think the great thing is that the three beach cities, Redondo, Hermosa, and Manhattan, are in concert with one another as it relates to homelessness. There's a regional coordination plan in place between the three beach cities. And so we often see folks very fluidly move between the three beach cities. And so being able to have a team of people who are accessible in all three, we could run into someone from Hermosa and Manhattan and be able to say, oh, I know who you are, or vice versa. And so being able to have access to those three cities and partnering with the same partners that have already been talked about, along with other nonprofit organizations who are operating in those areas, I think that's the piece that's been really critical in terms of communication. And I think that's collaboration and communication are what the coordinated entry system is about. And that's what makes us really effective at the work that we do. So we will continue to do what we've been doing. But I think we, as a leadership team amongst the beach cities, we meet monthly and we discuss, what are the trends that's happening in each city. And I would say the trends are pretty similar throughout. And so, we, if anything changes, we definitely alert one another. We're in communication all of the time. So I wouldn't say that there's anything too different at this point that I've seen, but just knowing that by nature, the beach cities with the beach and the PCH corridor, things are just quite fluid.
All right, thank you, Brianna. The next question I think is probably for Anna, maybe for the chief, maybe for Brianna, maybe for some of our other folks. But it is, what can we do to force homeless people off our streets? If we build a shelter, are we able to force them off our streets and beaches if they do not wish to leave? I think this issue has been touched upon in the discussion of the Boise versus Martin, or Martin versus Boise case, as well as some of the efforts we've focused on the 2nd Street beach restrooms, for example. But if you want to recap that or add to it, that's the question that's been posed.
So the question is, what can we do to force people off the streets if we build a shelter? Can we do that? That's a tough question. We have to. The short answer is, if you build a shelter within the city, then per Martin v. Boise, you'd be able to take enforcement action under a camping violation. So if you offer a person who's experiencing homelessness a shelter bed, and they say no, then you'd be able to cite that individual for a violation of a Muni Code violation, which would be a misdemeanor. I would just, that it is once you establish a shelter, that would be the way to go about that. There is also a caveat in the Martin v. Boise case that talks about having time and place restrictions. So, like I believe it was Lieutenant mentioned, that is the reason why the beach has a time parameters, that you can't just camp on the beach at night. That is something that Martin v. Boise talks about as possibly being permissible. So camping in public, being in public, is something that you cannot take action against unless you have a shelter to offer that person as well.
Mayor, I'll just follow up a little bit, piggyback on what Anna said. Again, it goes back to the term enforcement. What does that mean? So even if there is a shelter available, the folks that are highly visible, the ones that are being talked about that are out on the street, they don't want that, generally speaking. And so now you get to a situation where, if you just think in real terms, you've got an officer out there at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, we can take you to a shelter. They say no. All right, then you're coming with us. They say no. Now we're going to have a use of force over a person who's camping. That is something that our officers are going to use very, very strict discretion on, because we also understand the state of policing today, and we have a responsibility to respect human dignity. So generally speaking, the enforcement would end up in a citation. If we were to get them to cooperate, where they were willing to move, and many times they are, if they're not willing to go to a shelter, they're going to move, but they're just going to move to another place where they're going to remain unhoused. So this is a challenge that a real challenge officers face every single night as they address this situation. And if they do take them to jail, it's very common that the folks that we're dealing with who are camping have bags and bags of items, shopping carts full of items, tents and everything else. And there are very clear laws that state that when somebody is taken into custody, it's the police department's responsibility to ensure the safekeeping of every single piece of property that somebody has. And we would be held responsible for anything that was damaged or not accounted for. So again, officers have to weigh in as to whether or not they want to spend many times 3 or 4 hours inventorying, processing, and booking somebody for a charge that, according to the current laws, we couldn't hold them on anyway. And so discretion becomes very important, and that's why the creative strategies we're doing with the city prosecutor's office allows us over time to have more effective enforcement for things such as stay away orders and other areas where it gives us immediate ability to arrest.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Anna. I just want to do a quick time check for the people participating. It's 7 o'clock. We still have another hour to go. So we're working through your questions. I can see folks submitting questions via chat. So we're going to continue working through questions. We should have plenty of time to get through the ones that have been submitted so far, and we'll keep working through them as long as we have time. So the next pair of questions are with respect to people who are perceived to be happy being homeless. In other words, they don't want to have services or have housing provided to them. Is there any requirement that they be looking for housing and or jobs in terms of how we manage them?
I can speak from a service provider standpoint that we don't require employment or anything prior to our engagement or offering of services. So those are the things that we would help someone access if that was something that they needed. And so there's no prerequisite for our services. Those are all things we would advocate for and connect them with in the community.
Okay. So for example, I know in some states, I believe that there's some rules with respect to financial benefits or welfare that you're required to be looking for work in order to receive them, whether it's unemployment benefits or other kinds of assistance. There's no distinction drawn in terms of how we manage homeless individuals with respect to whether they're looking for work or whether they're looking for housing, in terms of how we work with them to educate them about resources that are available and how we otherwise manage them. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's see. All right. Is anyone considering declaring a state of emergency in the county or in California about the issue with respect to homelessness? And the background for this is we don't have the same issue that Venice Beach does, but homelessness is increasing across the state. And the question is posed on the basis of that, whether an emergency declaration regarding homelessness is something that has been considered at any level of government. Does anybody have any information on that topic? I, for one, am not aware of any discussion along those lines.
I can answer from a county's point of view because the county has declared a shelter state of emergency, and then we have declared another state of emergency, which allowed us to receive funds in order at the beginning of the pandemic. And so some of the investments that the county is doing in permanent supportive housing, because like we said, housing first, that's the model that the county, LAHSA, and our providers have, is getting someone into housing first. And so the county is looking to invest in one in particular is Project Home Key, which is purchasing of these motels and hotels to be transformed into permanent supportive housing. The state has allotted money for around 2 of that. And then the county is looking to invest its own money in the purchasement of these motels and hotels. In addition, we're looking to invest in prefabricated units, these sort of prefab tiny home type of units for permanent supportive housing, since we know the building of traditional units is just too expensive. They're over $500,000 per unit, and it takes years. And so we're trying to find ways to find an expeditious way to create more permanent supportive housing. So to answer that question, yes, we have declared. We are, due to the declaration, we are receiving funds that now we're looking to reinvest in the community. And so Project Room Key was part of that. And now Project Home Key is part of that also.
Okay. And Ivan, is the declaration of emergency or the declarations of emergency tied to the COVID-19 pandemic, or are they separate?
So the initial one, the shelter declaration, was not part of the pandemic. Then once the pandemic happened, there was another declaration so that we could receive FEMA funding.
Okay. And do you know that's county specific? Do you know whether any other counties in California have declared similar emergencies, or if the state is considering it?
Yes, I believe other counties have declared, and I even believe that the city of Los Angeles has declared also.
Okay. Next question isn't really a question, but it was from someone who was suggesting that the 211 number for reporting non-emergency issues with respect to homeless individuals would be one way to access the system and make a report. Brianna, is that correct information? Does 211, is that a conduit for people to file a report on a non-emergency homeless issue?
211 is a way for folks in need of service to access and request services. I know that there's also other resources available through there, but in order to access outreach services, it would be through that www.la-hop.org website. That's going to be the best way to get us the information on the individual, whether they're in their vehicle, on the streets, a physical description. All of that is going to be much better gathered through that portal or reported directly to us at Harbor Interface so we can get that to the appropriate teams.
I would also just say that for families experiencing housing instability, 211 would be the primary source of access for information. We find that oftentimes families with children need a hotel voucher or something to keep them out of the streets for a night or two. 211 would be the best way to access that for families.
Just to add on, yeah, to what Jose was saying, 211 has vouchers that they're able to get on the spot and then sent to a motel for the night. We've had situations where we get a call from a woman with a child on a Friday night. You know, some of our providers are gone, 211 is open, 211 does a triage, and then they say, okay, there's a hotel here. Can you get there, and we'll put you up for the weekend. Until then, you can connect to someone, whether it's Harbor Interfaith, whether it's another provider. So 211 works for families in need.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, as I mentioned, the Harbor Interfaith is the SPA 8 lead. I work with the adult population, but we do have a family regional coordinator and a youth regional coordinator for those that are 18 to 24. So 211 is a great, as Ivan and Jose said, a great after hours tool and a way to access information right away and those motel vouchers. And then from there, we hope to connect folks with the most appropriate provider.
Okay, but to be clear, if I'm understanding it correctly, 211 is primarily a resource for folks at risk of or experiencing homelessness themselves to be connected to resources. Is that right? Or is it also a resource for the public to report somebody who is at risk or actually homeless?
No, I think to access, but not to report. To report, LA Hop would be the primary way we would suggest you do that.
Okay. All right. Next question is, if someone's sleeping in a tent and is offered housing but refuses it, what happens? And put another way, how do the beach cities enforce the no camping laws? I think we've touched on this, but I'm not sure if specifically the question about if somebody refuses housing, do we have any ability to require them to accept housing, for example?
Mr. Mayor, I can maybe answer part of that, not so much on the housing aspect, but as we've touched on when it comes to the beaches and parks, as Anna mentioned, we have the ability to enforce time, place, and manner restrictions as they pertain to public safety. So in Hermosa Beach, we have a municipal code that limits the hours of the beach, and that applies to anyone, whether they're camping or not. The beach is closed from midnight to 6 a.m. because it's proven that big open spaces in late night hours are places where crimes do occur. So it's a public safety reason. It's a time, place, and manner restriction. The same applies to all the parks in the city of Hermosa Beach. All established parks have hours. It's a separate municipal code, and the parks are closed from 10 p.m. to, I believe it's 5 a.m. So that's another time, place, and manner restriction. And that is an enforcement mechanism that we utilize. And one thing I want to add to that for the community to consider is, we have somebody who may be on the beach who is in a sleeping bag and sleeping, and maybe that's all it is. Or we certainly want to avoid anyone who's setting up anything more significant than that. But when we move them off the beach, where does that person go? Now they're going into our neighborhoods and they're going into our residential areas. So it's something that we have to find a careful balance, but we do enforce it. It is something that when we get a call or we have an observation, we will contact the individual And most often, again, exercising that discretion, we will ask them to pack up their stuff and move along, and they usually do so. But that is something we do enforce. It is a mechanism we have.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Lieutenant. The next question, I think this one is probably for Jose, Brianna, Latina. Is there a wait for available housing now? And specifically, is there a wait for mental health and rehabilitation placement now?
So I'll start maybe with the housing. We obviously, as we've all seen, the need across the county outsizes the availability of available housing. Oftentimes, hard decisions need to be made, and that's where the coordinated entry system kicks in to try to get folks who have the highest security or highest need, folks who are gravely disabled, folks who are who need a higher level of care. That's where the sort of the permanent supportive housing or the more intensive wraparound services are reserved for. So obviously, folks who fall short of that may not necessarily have the quick availability for long-term housing. We obviously, through our provider network or community, offer sort of time-limited resources. Rapid rehousing comes to mind, which is a sort of a 2-year subsidy for rent. So folks who obviously don't need the higher wraparound services, but just need some sort of financial assistance. They are, for lack of a better words, vouchers that can be used to supplement rent up to 2 years. And so that's always an option that we have for folks. Obviously, the unfortunately, Southern California, high rents oftentimes make that very difficult. The other thing that makes things difficult is just the availability or just willingness of landlords to accept some of these resources. So sort of a quick pitch to you, Mayor, and the rest of your colleagues, if there are willing landlords who have empty units, there are certainly a number of different resources that we can use to pair individuals who don't have high acuity, but just need some financial assistance to pair them up with those particular units. I mean, I'll stop there if Brianna or Latina want to jump in.
Terrific. Latina, how about our resources for folks in need of mental health services? Do we have resources to keep up with the demand, or is there a wait for mental health services?
Yeah, so I mean, it's much like you said, Mayor, it's a complex situation, complex issues. So there is certainly housing available for people who experience mental illness. The range of need varies from person to person. Some people have a mental illness and have mild to moderate symptoms, and some people have much more severe symptoms requiring much more structured living setting. There's certainly, much like Jose said, there's the need sort of outpaces the resources, but there is housing that is out there and that's available. Oftentimes the question for us is, getting the person to accept treatment or getting them to accept the housing, because the illness itself creates some reluctance to go indoors, some reluctance to engage in treatment, et cetera. But there are housing resources available, whether that's permanent supportive housing, the resources that Jose was speaking about, or residential care facilities. There are resources that are out there, but certainly we need more, is kind of the bottom line.
All right. And the next question I think is best directed at you as well, Latina, and it relates to the conservatorship concept that you described in your opening remarks. And I'll read the question. The idea of a conservatorship sounds relatively new. Sounds different than those with mental health issues, where I think people had to be deemed an immediate risk to themselves or others. Sounds like it's for people that the community fears aren't having their basic needs met, such as food and shelter. How does someone qualify for conservatorship? How are they deemed in need of it? What is the process? What are the criteria for using that particular tool?
Sure, thank you. So the concept of conservatorship as a tool is not anything new. The way that the department is currently exercising it in our efforts providing street outreach and street-based services for people experiencing mental illness and homelessness is a new concept. What the participant wrote in the question about, being in immediate need or at immediate risk really is, I believe, in reference to what the chief spoke of earlier as it relates to a 5150, which is a 72-hour hold for someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis. Conservatorship is generally something that might be pursued once that person was hospitalized and they didn't seem to be getting better with medication and treatment. Without going into the very finite details of how that process progresses, conservatorship is always kind of the last resort when it's clear that the person is not going to be able to care for themselves. And it is on that continuum, starting with the 5150 and then going beyond that, where the court actually designates that the person is unable to care for themselves. And it is still due to a mental illness in the same, with the same sort of foundational structure as the 5150. In terms of what makes one eligible is really they have to meet the legal standard and definition of gravely disabled, meaning they are unable to care for their food, clothing, or shelter as a consequence, as a direct consequence of a mental illness. It is not an easy process to go through. Conservatorship from a legal standard, the burden of proof is the same as murder, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, because it's a big deal to take away someone's civil liberties. The benefit is that the court can appoint a guardian who can oversee making directives about where the person lives, whether they take medication, helping them manage their finances, the broad strokes of what it takes to live safely in the community. The way that we operate is as Brianna and Jose said, we work in a coordinated system of outreach. We work with our partners with Harbor Interfaith and with LASA. When someone is referred to the home team, we go out and we assess that person. Our psychiatrist, kind of makes a determination of whether this person is able to respond to treatment. We try to engage them in treatment. We offer every service under the sun. And if that does not seem to be moving the bar in any way and the person remains impaired, we then refer the individual to the Office of the Public Guardian for an investigation for conservatorship, and we stay with that individual while that investigation is under, is taking place. And our team will testify when and if it goes to the court to their inability to provide for self-care. And then subsequent to that, then the conservator establishes whatever benefits the person is eligible for, sets up housing in conjunction with our home team, and we make sure that the person is connected to long-term care for their mental illness.
Thank you, Latina. The next question could be for Ivan, Brianna, Jose, Latina. It's a multi-layered question, so let me see if I can distill it down. First, the questioner thanks you all for your expertise, and then dives into the controversy with respect to giving homeless people money when they ask for it on the street. And the question then is posed, are there programs that work with the local business community to sell certificates that the public can buy so that they can help fund food, grocery, haircuts, et cetera, basic needs for homeless folks, so that they can feel confident that their funds are used for necessary and vital items? I don't know, that's the first question. And then broader conceptually, is the system set up so that there are wraparound services provided at places where homeless individuals are referred so that they can get their basic needs met, from food to shelter and everything in between, healthcare included, as a sort of one-stop shop, as opposed to doing it sort of on an individualized basis? Any of you who wants to weigh in on the existence of a program that allows folks to contribute in a way that makes sure that their funds are provided for meeting basic needs. And then the broader question that I tacked onto it is also out there in case anybody has any thoughts about that.
So this is Brianna. I can speak to the second part. I'm not aware of any city-specific programs in Hermosa Beach. I'm not aware of that. But in terms of one-stop shop, so to speak, for services, pre-COVID, we hosted as quarterly, we hosted homeless resource fairs for individuals experiencing homelessness. So at those resource fairs, in collaboration with all of the providers already talked about, we would ask that the DMV be present, and most often they were able to be present and set up a mobile one-stop so that we could get folks their IDs on the spot. In terms, they would leave with a temporary ID, and we would provide the mailing address as previously discussed. We would have haircuts. In one setting, we had hand washing and feet washing, if that was something folks were interested in. We've been able to utilize the county mobile shower unit in a lot of those resource fairs, and other resources that are there, the obvious housing resources that are available to folks, trying to meet folks and get them enrolled and ensure that they've got access to all of the resources. But we do try wherever possible, and we are starting to kind of roll those out again. And so since we are the CES, the Coordinated Entry System lead for the South Bay, we kind of travel throughout the South Bay to ensure access to those. But we always make a stop in the beach cities wherever there's space available. And in the past, it's been held, for instance, at the Redondo Beach Performing Arts Center, and we've had a wonderful turnout. And it's been in collaboration with the surrounding cities, not only the beach cities, but other cities nearby. And then the outreach team's providing transportation to and from the event, because that's usually the biggest barrier to getting folks to those one-stop shops. So we find them to be incredibly, incredibly helpful to the folks that we serve, and we look forward to being able to start doing those again.
Brianna, are you guys still the Access Center lead?
Yes, so we are the Access Center and our Access Center is located in San Pedro. So for folks in the beach cities, it might be a little bit of a challenge, which is why we have the mobile outreach team who can go to the folks. That makes it easier. But yes, we are the Access Center for the South Bay, located in San Pedro.
Latina, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll speak to that in just a little bit. I'm kind of piggybacking on what Brianna said. And I don't think it's happening in the beach cities at this time, but something that we did start with the Department of Mental Health and some of the LA City and LA County libraries was similar to what Brianna talked about, like kind of the Homeless Connect Days, but doing those Homeless Connect Days in the public libraries system, so that they were in a setting where we know people are already going on a designated day every month, that those comprehensive services were provided, say, on the last Tuesday of the month at the library, so people knew where to go, and we could kind of keep the ball rolling if we knew that somebody got their ID at the last event, but this time they need their Social Security card, that even if we couldn't find them, they knew that the last Tuesday of the month at the local library, I can go and they're going to have the source event, which is what we called it, and they could go access those sort of comprehensive services as a one-stop shop anywhere in the county, within the county or city library system. And as to the other question about the idea of using like kind of a voucher system for people to for the public, for the community to contribute so that people can get their basic needs met. I know of no such program. I think the closest I'm aware of is in the city of Pasadena, where they did those meters, the parking meters that the community could contribute money for homeless services. But I think it's a great idea, maybe something worth exploring in the future.
Okay, thank you both. So we're at 7:25. We still have 35 minutes. We have a whole bunch of questions stacked up. So I won't call it the lightning round, but if we can, some of these touch on issues we've talked about before, but if we can, get through our answers as quickly as we can. You're all doing a terrific job. That's not meant to imply that the information you have imparted has not been valuable. It has been extraordinarily valuable. But given our time, and the number of questions we have. If we can be as concise as possible, we might get through the maximum number of questions. So the next question is Hermosa considering any solutions like the pallet shelters that Redondo Beach is utilizing? And so I'll address this from the city council level. Our city at all levels is in touch with our beach cities neighbors as well as our South Bay neighbors. So at the council level, we have a delegate to the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, which meets monthly, where all the cities come together. They talk about issues that affect us in the South Bay, and homelessness is one of them. And that's one of the places where we exchange information, such as what Redondo is doing, what other cities are doing at that level. I also know, as the chief pointed out, that he meets regularly with police chiefs across the beach cities in the South Bay and the region, and they compare notes on what's going on in their cities, what's working, what isn't working. And that includes conversations with respect to homelessness. In fact, that's one of the featured conversations. I'm pretty sure the same thing is true at the staff level. We're in constant contact, especially with our beach cities neighbors, about what they're doing about any number of different challenges we all face, including homelessness in particular. So to answer the question, my understanding at the council level is no council member has asked us to put this on the agenda to discuss. I think we're at the point of continuing to gather information, evaluate the success and the long-term success of this program before we would consider adapting it for Hermosa Beach or adopting it for Hermosa Beach. So at the council level, we have not had any conversations about whether that's a solution that would be suitable to Hermosa Beach. I think the program is new enough that we're still in the process of gathering information and evaluating it. Suja, Chief, do you have anything to add, or does that, is that consistent with where the police department and our staff generally is?
Mr. Mayor, I think it's very consistent with where we are. I just wanted to add that we are speaking with our partners and, as you said, observing how the pilot program is going. There may be an opportunity to partner with another city or a couple of cities. It is something that requires real estate, so it may be difficult for one city in a small beach community to pull off on its own, but perhaps as a shared resource. So we're looking at that and watching the pilot program very closely and being as supportive as we can.
Okay, thank you, Suja. Next question. Is somebody who's homeless in Hermosa able to be placed in a temporary shelter in Redondo Beach?
So as mentioned, homelessness is regional. So we work off of the service planning area or SPA system. And so Harbor Interfaith uses whatever resources are available to them at their disposal. So whether it's within the SPA, but as we've sort of alluded to, resources in all areas are very scarce. And so we try to find them where possible, nearest to where people find themselves homeless and unsheltered in their location.
Okay. All right, here's another question. Our city is 1 square mile. We possibly don't have the space to physically house a shelter in our city. It sounds like there is still some ambiguity in what the Boise decision means, and if a city has to provide housing within the city limits. Is there anything being done to resolve any ambiguity in terms of the application of the Boise decision? Is there anything going on in the courts to further clarify, what the contours of the Boise decision are for how we manage this challenge? That would be, Anna, you froze for a second. I don't know.
Sorry, yeah, I got most of that. Regarding whether or not the shelter has to be within the city, the 1 square mile of the city of Hermosa. There is no guidelines as far as does it have to be within the city? Could the SPA jurisdiction suffice? The only direction within the decision about enforcement was in the form of a footnote. I believe it was footnote 8. If anyone cares to look at that, it was about how cities or jurisdictions could enforce their camping ordinances in a time and location type of delineation. So between certain times, like between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., for example, it would be illegal to camp, or within certain amount of yardage of a shelter. So within 500 yards of a shelter, that may be permissible to use as an enforcement ordinance. But as far as testing what it means to be within a certain jurisdiction, we really don't know. Obviously, Hermosa is very different than the city of Boise. I think there are some opinions out there that think that within a spa, so within our spa 8, might suffice as providing a shelter space. But again, it's just it doesn't give exact direction on that. I hope that I answered, despite the freezing of my computer. I hope that touched on the question.
I think it did. So it's to be determined what the contours of the decision are, and it's likely to be the subject of additional litigation.
That is correct. And the city, I can add, just based on what I've been following, the city of Los Angeles is now considering testing this very premise in the possibility of adopting their own time and space parameters in the confines of that Boise footnote. So they're trying to adopt a 500-yard camping prohibition in places that are near to elementary schools or shelters within the city. There are still a lot of questions about that. I know there's been some Los Angeles Times articles people can look up online to see more of that discussion about whether or not that's something that's even going to pass in the city of LA. And if and when it does pass, what does that mean for enforcement with law enforcement?
All right, thank you. Ivan, this question's for you. Can you give us a status on the proposal to use Dockweiler Beach as a temporary location? I'm not sure if it's to shelter homeless individuals or otherwise, but can you give us an update on that?
Of course. There was some stories going out there about the county partnering up with the city of Los Angeles to put sort of a type of pallet shelter, some type of interim housing at Dockweiler. At this time, there is no plan. The one thing that we are doing is sort of exploring and having a conversation with the city if it's even feasible. But as of right now, there's no concrete plan to put a shelter there.
All right. Is Dockweiler the property of LA County or the city of LA?
LA County.
Okay.
So this would be one of those collaboration type projects.
Understood. Next question. Is there a different approach or strategy if a homeless individual is a veteran? And this question is for anybody.
I can take this one as it relates to our engagement. So nothing really changes with our engagement except for someone does identify as a veteran. That alerts us to then notify our veteran providers, which there's many, including the VA, hospital, medical center, and our supportive services for veteran and family programs. So we would alert them that we have a veteran and collaborate with them to find the most appropriate veteran housing resource. If someone is open to that, whether that's HUD-VASH through Section 8 or other permanent supportive housing that is built specifically for veterans, we would help them access that if that's something that they would like. So it does open some more doors in terms of housing resources. And so we would pursue that right away during our outreach engagement.
All right, thank you. Latina.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. That again, in that coordinated sort of approach to outreach, the Department of Mental Health also has a veteran-specific program. It's the Veterans Peer Access Network. So we work in collaboration with all of our partners here, because sometimes a veteran is given other than honorable discharge, so they may not be eligible for some of the resources like the VASH resources that Brianna spoke about, or some other VA benefits. And our VPAN program has the ability to connect veterans to alternative services and try to reestablish a service connection and change the discharge status.
Great, thank you both. This is not a question. It's simply for the benefit of the audience. This is a comment from one of our participants. And they basically indicated that, like lots of us, they were frustrated at what they saw as the uptick in the homeless population and evidence of camping in certain parts of the city. And what they did was reach out to the city staff, and the city staff were responsive and came down and met with the individual and the neighbors to basically do what we're doing here on this forum and provide information and help provide some context to the challenge and what we can and can't do. And so they just wanted to recommend to folks, which is something I wholeheartedly endorse, which is for folks participating, get to know your neighborhood watch block captain, talk to your neighbors. If your neighbors are expressing the same kind of frustration that you have or may have had, by all means, you can work through your neighborhood watch block captain, or you can contact city staff directly and set up a meeting where they'll come out and they'll talk to you and your neighbors about whether it's a particular issue you have with a particular homeless individual that you see in your neighborhood, or with what's happening in the city, generally speaking. And they can answer your questions directly and provide you as much information as we have on what we're doing, what resources are being brought to bear on the challenge, and where things stand generally. All right. There's a comment here that goes like this. I believe I heard the social worker only worked with the police department once a week. Assuming that is true, would it help the situation if we increase that amount of time that the social worker folks work with our police department? That question is for Lieutenant Phillips or Brianna or anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to comment and clarify a couple of things. I don't think we specifically said this, and I want our community to know. So our partnership with the Department of Mental Health, we're very fortunate and grateful to LA County for providing this. They provide 2 mental health clinicians, which work 5 days a week in the beach cities. So that's Redondo Beach, Hermosa, Manhattan, and El Segundo. Each of those clinicians, on their days, they ride with a police officer for the entire shift. And it's the co-response of a police officer and a mental health clinician. And they respond to all mental health calls, not just homeless issues, but all mental health calls in the 4 beach cities. So Hermosa Beach has 1 clinician who's in Hermosa 1 day a week. But for that day, that clinician and that officer, they cover all 4 cities. And then the second clinician, who may be in Redondo at the same time, or maybe in El Segundo at the same time, they also cover all 4 cities. So it's 2 clinicians covering the 4 beach cities 5 days a week, and they're all partnered with the police officer. But I also want to acknowledge our friends at Harbor Interfaith. They're not just behind the scenes doing this from an office. They are out in the community 5 days a week, and they're always working. And our community may not see that, but they're making contacts and making referrals every day, and then they communicate with us, and they may need more information about an individual on where they may be located. And because we've had officers contact them several times throughout the week, that we know they're no longer at this location. You might want to try a different spot of the city. So that's the answer to part of that question. The other part, it was, would more resources like this help? Sure, absolutely. We could use more resources, but we are working within the confines of what our partners are able to provide. We'd love to have more. We've talked about, can we have a dedicated clinician just for Hermosa Beach? And it's just a matter of available resources being spread out on this very large issue. And I'll stop there if anyone else has other comments.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you for that. So let me direct a question to Latina, Brianna, Anna, whoever wants to weigh in on this. If a person appears to have difficulty taking care of themselves or appears to have mental health issues, what can the community do to help alert us to that so that they can have contact and services provided to them? Is it the same process that we've talked about for reaching out to the police department through 911, or reaching out through to LA Hop through the website link that's on the chat function and information on our homeless services page on the city website and so on? Or is there something in particular that we can do when we have a concern about an individual who has difficulty caring for themselves or other mental health issues?
So I'll start. So for someone who's having an immediate sort of psychiatric crisis, they're a danger to themselves or a danger to someone else. If that, I would always say call 911. As the lieutenant was saying, we are the Department of Mental Health is partnered with the beach cities law enforcement to respond to those kinds of crises and to get someone immediate help and assessment for 5150. If it's something that's more chronic, like kind of what I talked about with conservatorship is a much more chronic state of being. It's not an acute situation. It's someone who's not able to care for themselves secondary to their illness. I would say that's really an issue that we'd want to tap into the larger coordinated system that Brianna and Jose have been talking about, using LA Hop or Harbor Interfaith directly to let them know, hey, we have this person out there that we're really concerned about. And then through our partnership, we will determine whether or not that's something that Harbor Interfaith can handle. Is the illness such that they can manage it and connect that person to services, or does it rise to the level where specialty care is needed and we need to bring in our home team and our psychiatrists and assess further for maybe a conservatorship or some other more intensive intervention. So I don't know, Brianna.
I think you answered it wonderfully. Again, to echo, if it's a non-emergency where you're seeing someone experiencing homelessness and they're not in an active crisis, the LA Hop website is the great spot, or reaching out to us directly. And then, otherwise utilizing 911 to report folks that might be in crisis.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Latina and Brianna. Next question, do we provide services to people sleeping in vehicles at the same type and level that we provide services to folks who are sleeping on the street?
So there's something that a number of areas, municipalities administer called safe parking. What we've seen and through general practice that vehicular dwellers who are experiencing homelessness have different needs. Oftentimes those folks have stable 9-to-5 jobs, but unfortunately don't make enough to pay a monthly rent. And so some of the needs of folks who are living in vehicles are unique. And so there are programs such as safe parking, which are sort of lots secured that will allow folks to park there overnight. In addition to the ability to just find a safe location overnight, there are wraparound services provided by the provider or the administrator of that particular program, which allows them to, again, identify perhaps financial assistance, some other resources that can get them off their feet. So I'm not quite familiar if there's any safe parking programs in Spot A. Brianna, I'm not sure if you know, but that would be sort of the ideal target program for folks living in their vehicles.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I know that there are City of LA specific safe parking programs in terms of county, not exactly, I don't believe that we do. But what I can say is that our outreach teams do engage with individuals sleeping in their vehicles in much of the same way. I think the challenge is, as Jose mentioned, a lot of those folks do have traditional 9-to-5 jobs. So, not necessarily in their vehicle at that location when we might be outreaching that location. So what our team does is they'll leave a business card or some sort of note on a windshield to say, hey, we're here to offer services, please reach out, so that they know that someone's been there and then they can access services maybe on an off day, or if it's better for us to have an outreach team who works the weekends come out and engage. We do have, not at Harbor Interfaith, but through other providers who operate in the South Bay, we do have weekend outreach teams. So those are some of the caveats. And then in the LA Hop request, the only ask that I would have is as much of the description of the vehicle and the place that the vehicle is parked. That'll give our team much more success in locating the individual's vehicle and providing those outreach services.
All right, terrific. Thank you for that. Next question. What's the best way our community can support and assist all of your efforts in providing resources to individuals experiencing homelessness, to try to connect them to services, to provide, to support as best we can the efforts of not only our city staff, but all the folks who are involved with respect to your different agencies. So anybody who wishes to, weigh in on this, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but by all means, this is an opportunity to add to what the information you've already provided.
Mr. Mayor, I can start out from the police department. It's quite simple, and I'll just be repeating myself, but we need to know about it. And it's frustrating when the community is talking about a problem that the police didn't even know about. Although social media is a great place to pass information along, it shouldn't be the starting point of that information. And I'll just reiterate, our officers have an incredibly robust communication system when it comes to logging every single call they go to on a daily basis. That's sent out to the entire police department with the description of each call. And then at shift change, they come in and talk to each other and share that information so that the officers going out in the street know exactly what happened the previous shift. So telling us about it, even though it doesn't feel like sometimes we can take the immediate action that people expect or want, the information is critical to allowing us to have those long-term problem-solving solutions.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone else want to add anything?
This is Brianna with Harbor Interfaith again. Essentially the same thing that the chief said in terms of reporting. And so we really view the community as kind of an extension of our outreach efforts. And so the information that you provide to us is incredibly helpful. And if there's more information that you'd like to provide more information, in the LA HOP request, you can put your contact information so that our outreach team members, if they need additional information because they're not able to locate or they're missing some information, then they can reach out to you. But yeah, really, really encourage utilizing that as a way for us to engage folks.
Terrific. Latina.
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant, but certainly we need to know who's out there and we need to know what they're experiencing. And the best way to do that is through those two mechanisms that I talked about, through 911 if it's a crisis, or through our leadership on CES, through Harbor Interfaith if it's kind of a chronic condition. And then I would just say, like, at the end of the day, what we need more than anything are resources. And they're both interim housing resources. As Jose said, shelter is not like the solution; it's a temporary piece. But it's a critical piece because if we don't have places for people to go, it doesn't matter how much outreach we do, we're kind of stuck in the same situation. So to whatever degree the community is willing and able to advocate for some degree of interim housing in a particular geographic region, because the truth is we need it all over the county, not in one designated area, but we need resources countywide. So to the degree that the community could work with us in that regard, and we just need the advocacy and the voices to bring those resources to bear, and just a partnership in that regard.
Okay, great.
Mayor, if I can just quickly plug, maybe there are folks on the line who are landlords or know of someone who is a landlord. We're always looking for different units to be able to utilize for the purposes that were discussed over the last hour and a half. So if there's any interest in that, I'd urge the mayor to work with Supervisor Han's office or myself in my office to figure out how to link up some of the resources available for folks interested in participating.
Okay, good. Next question is for Ivan, I believe, and this is a tough one that's probably one that we could spend 3 hours on. Why does it seem like the population of homeless individuals in LA County is going up and the challenges are growing in spite of the Measure H tax money that is being brought to bear on the problem? I understand from what I read that the cost of building housing units is a factor. Community acceptance of permanent housing is a factor. What are the challenges? Why does it seem as if in year 3 or 4 of Measure H, the problem appears to many people to be growing.
Yes, well, like you said, sure we could spend hours on it, but just a quick snapshot. You know, with Measure H, we were able to house more people than we have ever before. I think in the last fiscal year, it was over 20,000 people that we've housed in permanent supportive housing, with about the same number interim housing, give or take a couple thousand. But then we have this new inflow of individuals coming into homelessness. And so, you know, one of the frustrations that my boss, Supervisor Hahn, has is really looking at this and looking at our strategies, because, you know, the way we use Measure H is using our homeless strategies that then dictate, you know, prevention, outreach, workforce development. And so from there, the supervisor has introduced a motion in one of our past meetings to relook at the homeless strategies, because you're right, we're at the halfway point of Measure H, and Measure H will only last for another 5 years, and so we really need to be looking at the different avenues, whether it's prefabricated units for permanent supportive housing, whether it's more acquisition of motels and hotels to be renovated, because you're right, Mayor, I think the cost per unit is a little over $500,000 per unit to build these sort of traditional permanent supportive housing developments, and they take years. And by the time a developer gets their tax credits, gets their financing, their funding, permitting, and moves forward with construction, it could take years. That's why we're trying to find other avenues to spur up permanent supportive housing, to create new shelter, and really reevaluate our strategies. And so the county's doing that as we speak, reevaluating what we are doing in managing the homeless problem. Because you're right, I think the public will say it's gotten a little bit worse what they're seeing.
Ivan, is part of the challenge community acceptance of permanent housing?
Yes, and that's another challenge. You know, I handle a handful of homeless housing projects, and sometimes, you know, the acceptance can be a little bit of a barrier. I'll give you a good example. In the city of Downey, we're looking to do 80 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless veterans and veteran families. And so, you know, we thought, oh, that should be easy. You know, we honor them at our baseball games. You know, we honor them on the 4th of July, on Memorial Day. You know, let's do something for our veterans. But let me tell you, the community acceptance took months of engagement because of the stigma of just it being homelessness. Having the idea that we're going to be building the 90s type projects, you know, from the 90s. And that's not what we're looking to build. I mean, we're looking to build state-of-the-art developments with wraparound services. And so I think it takes a little bit of time to explain that to the community and to provide them an understanding of what in reality permanent supportive housing is, because a lot of people have the mentality or the thought that it's these 90s type projects with the crime that's going to come in. And that's really not the case in this day and age.
Okay, great.
Mayor, can I just quickly, Mayor, to address some of the inflow issues that we're seeing? Quite frankly, there's just been sort of more folks falling into homelessness than we're able to house. Like for every, it's an interesting stat that we've identified, for every one person that we place in some sort of permanent housing, long-term housing, a little bit over 2 become homeless. And so that's sort of a fixed figure that we're seeing due to a number of economic reasons. Sort of folks who see on the streets oftentimes paint everyone in the same brush, but I feel there's a lot more folks who you don't see who are out in the street living in their vehicles, families, a lot of veterans, youth out there. So I think there's more to it than just the folks that you currently see on the street. There's financial reasons, economic reasons why you find yourself out there. I would also I would be remiss if I not mention that the state of California is currently in a rent moratorium, which ends in September. Once that moratorium is lifted, I would venture to say that you will probably see a lot more folks out in the street. And that's a fear that folks who are in this space are kind of thinking through and figuring out how to address long term. But that's a reality that all communities, especially those that have a larger percentage of their residents in rental units will certainly experience at some point. So I just wanted to kind of make sure to flag that for folks.
All right, thank you, Jose. Thank you, everybody. This is certainly a challenge that's going to take time, an extensive period of time likely to see results. I think we all understand that. Is there anything else you'd like our community to know about your agency, how they can support it, what you're doing in terms of providing resources to address this challenge? Anything we haven't covered? All right. All right, I'm going to give one last call for questions. Anybody who's participating, we have 4 minutes left. So if you have a last burning question, go ahead and type it into the chat and we'll see if we can get to it. We do have a comment from one of our participants thanking you all for your hard work on this complex issue. And that's something certainly that I echo.
There was one comment, I think Megan was talking about Dockweiler. You know, I don't, since it's not part of this community, I would love to engage with you. Maybe if you could call our office at 213-974, wait, no. Yeah, 974-4444 in downtown. Would love to talk to you more about that specific project. If you could just call our office.
Okay, good. And do you know, while we're on, Ivan, do you have any information regarding why Dockweiler is a consideration?
Oh yeah, so it's just a consideration because, you know, to the question, most homeless individuals want to stay in the region that they are homeless. You know, they feel that they are part of the community, and in some cases, you know, they were raised there. They have a memory there. They say, you know, I went to school here, or you know, I grew up just a couple blocks before, and then do some type of, you know, economic situation. You know, we just had a housing crisis in 2008 that has still affected many individuals who are homeless, and so most of the time we want to build shelter and provide services in the community that the individuals are in, or as close to as possible. You wouldn't believe how many times I get proposals of putting homeless people in the desert, putting them somewhere in Lancaster, far away, you know, that they are a burden to the community. But, you know, I asked for the community to have a little bit of patience and just thought that, you know, these are human beings that want help. So it's not good. We're not going to get them off the street immediately. You know, it takes time, as Brianna and, you know, Latina were talking about, and Jose was talking about, to build that rapport, to build that trust, to get them to want to take services. And in many instances, we have gotten them to take them services. Is it immediate? Sometimes not, but it does take time. And let me just tell you that our great provider, Harbor Interfaith, DMH, our people at LASA, you know, they're constantly going out there. They're working together. They're having case conferencing calls, seeing how they can help Miss Johnson, how they can help Robert, who sits by the Jack in the Box or who's by the beach. I mean, they are constantly talking to each other. And I know sometimes it doesn't seem like it when you're on your way, you're by your Starbucks and you're like, damn, it's that same person there every single day. But just know that we are diligently working to help them and get them the services they need. And sometimes that one day comes and we're able to do it.
Okay, great. And I will just close by just sort of piggybacking on that. And I know that under our homelessness plan and with our police department and with the resources we have represented here on this call, that I know that our police, as the chief said, are in regular contact with people experiencing homelessness in our city, and that we're giving not only law enforcement resources to them, but we're also making sure that they're aware that any manner of resources, whether it be housing or healthcare or mental health care, are available to them. And you know, we do our best to not only build relationships with them so that we make sure that they're not a threat to the community or to themselves, but to also make sure that we continually extend a hand to them to make sure that when they want services, we'll connect them to them. And I know Lieutenant Phillips, I think, told a story to the city council a while back about, you know, how for a particular individual, you know, the city went so far as to offer to fly this person back home to reunite them with their families. So to Ivan's point and to the points that have been made, there are a lot of resources being brought to bear on this problem, a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. It is a massive problem. As Jose mentioned, I share the significant concern that with the lifting of the eviction moratoria that we may see people being evicted, and that may cause this problem to grow. We are a county of 10 million people. We have the problem at a magnitude that few, if any other places do. So it's going to take the combined efforts of all of you who are doing just yeoman's work on this, for which I know the community is very appreciative. So for everybody who participated tonight, for our city staff, and for all of you who are our partners in this, I thank you very much for the efforts that you've made and will continue to make to help us solve this challenge and do right by not only the people who are experiencing homelessness, but by our community and our neighbors as well. With that, we are going to close the forum. Thank you all very much for being here. We are sharing our screen with a bit of information about the LA HOP portal, where you can report folks who are experiencing homelessness and connect them with folks who can reach out to them to make sure that they are made available or have services made available to them. So that's on your screen for a moment there. And with that, Madam City Manager, is there anything that we have left out that we want to touch on before we adjourn this forum?
No, Mr. Mayor, absolutely not. I did just want to share one thing on behalf of the staff and our partners. We understand that our ability to respond and fix the problem is not immediate. We're in it for the long haul. And as you've heard from our service providers and our partners from the various agencies that are here today, they're in it for the long haul too. And so I urge our residents to continue with their compassion that they express to us, and also the patience that they've shared with us thus far, as this is not something that we can take care of overnight, as folks know. And so we're definitely in it for the long haul. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. I'm sure we will meet again soon as we work through this challenge. Thank you all.